Hello and welcome to On Teaching. Hey, if you're brand new, welcome. Here's what this is about. Uh, I think the time is ripe to change education, but I believe the best way to change education is from within by helping teachers to improve their craft, to improve their practice, to help every single teacher become the best teacher that they can be. And talk more about that maybe in the future, but that's what this is all about. I want to create some challenging conversations and introduce some interesting ideas that might stretch you, that might make you pause and consider. And it's not just teachers that are involved. We're getting people from all walks of life involved because uh, education is really important for our society and our culture. So that's what this is all about. If you're not new, I want to thank you for sticking with us and for still being here. I hope you've gotten something meaningful out of this, not just the sound of my wonderful voice or my beautiful face, or the look of my beautiful face, right? uh, but here's what I'd like you to here's what I'd like you guys to do. Because I'm throwing mud at the wall, seeing what sticks, right? I don't have all the answers. I'm just trying something. I'm trying to start something. So, if something that has been discussed resonates with you, or if something that's been discussed is you find it disagreeable, I want to hear from you. The only way to push this thing forward is to have open discourse and dialogue, to introduce all kinds of ideas, to work through things. And so that's what I would like to see happen. And so there's several ways you can get involved. And wherever if you're watching this, listening to it, reading it, I will provide you the links in the appropriate spot so that you can get involved. You can leave comments below wherever it is that you're participating. So that would be on the podcast, there's a website that has a blog, and all the podcasts and all the videos from YouTube are hosted there. And so I just like to hear from you. Leave comments, get involved. But there's also a Facebook group. Facebook group is just focused on the topics we're discussing. All involve education. Like, for example, this week's question is, what teacher influenced you to become a teacher? Which is the teacher, if you could only pick one, which teacher was the person who made you think, wow, I really appreciate what they're doing, and I would like to do something like that for other people? And what is it what are the specifics that they, well, how is it they engaged with teaching that resonated with you? And then what skill of yours, not skill, that's the wrong word. What is it that you do that's really well? What I guess skill might be right. Anyway, what is it that you do in the class? What is it that you're good at that you've developed in a way that mimics that person that influenced you? So those are the kinds of discussions we're having, and I'd like you to join us there. And so I'll leave links to that there for you as well. And I'd want you to share this. I would like to see this grow. I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about education. And so the more involved, the better. And if this lights a fire in somebody else that is more intelligent, craftier, more articulate, uh, better suited to take on this challenge, then that would be fantastic, because the end result would be education improves. And I think with improved education, lots of things will fall into place better. Lots of things that we're struggling with. Okay. So anyway, I'll shut up about that now and let's get down to business. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the fifth foundational element of quality teaching. I came up with 7 just to get us started. This is the fifth. So once you've got your purpose well defined, the purpose of your class well defined, and you've ensured that all of the expectations of your students are aligned with that purpose, and you've got a whole class goal that really brings everybody in, makes everybody involved and feeling important and connected, and you've got your grades aligned with the things with your purpose, and the level of rigor is appropriate for your class, the next step is making sure that students have access to what it is they're supposed to learn, and then training them on being better students, training them how to engage with that. How do they respond when things go, squirrely, askew? That's what we're going to talk about today, okay? So the first thing, let me back up. the big idea here is that we are trying to help students be better. We're trying to help them be creative problem solvers, to be self-directed, self-governed. We want them to be creative and resilient. We want them to be determined goal seekers that reflect upon the stumbles that they have along the way, and they respond appropriately to be better. And so the outcomes of your class, the tests, should reflect students developing and becoming better. But so often it's easy to focus just on those outcomes and teach kids to the test, ignoring all those other things. Those other things are the art of teaching. That's what I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit today. So let's get started. So when I say students need to have access to everything that it is that it's expected of them, that would be like what I used in a community college where I taught. That would be a course expectations sheet. It's terse, it's short, it's concise, it's beautiful, right? This is a list. These are all the things you have to know. This is how you're going to demonstrate your knowledge and proficiency. Now, you might think your textbook is sufficient. Maybe you've been teaching for a long time with that textbook and you've grown comfortable with it and you think it's great. Maybe it is. But I'd like to challenge you on that. Not because I'm saying you're wrong or that your belief is incorrect, but it's like this. When we're familiar, we often develop this affinity to the thing that it is we're familiar with. So you can think of, say, a comfort food, especially a comfort food that's, culturally significant, something that your entire extended family enjoys, something you have quite often. Somebody on the outside isn't going to have that same experience. They're not going to be familiar with it. They're not going to find it comforting. They're not going to find it familiar. They might not even find it good. They might find it repulsive. So, that's an exaggeration of this situation, but a textbook might not be the be-all, end-all. And even if it's a great textbook, having more resources is better. So I'd like you to consider, how are the students able to engage with your textbook? Is it student-friendly? I mean, one of the philosophies that I want to help guide us is the idea that we need to prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. So is the textbook appropriate? Is it maybe just a little bit uncomfortable for them, but yet still accessible? Can they use it? Or is it, dumbed down so it's too easy? Or is it, beyond where they're at? So that's one of the things to consider, and there's no one answer because you have tons of students, right? So there's no, yes, this is absolutely it. And so having a diversified set of resources that students can access is absolutely wonderful. But students need to have that list of things that they have to learn and how they're going to learn it. Now, the resources that accompany that, it could be, like I was saying, it could be the textbook, but you don't necessarily have to produce all of those resources for the students. I mean, they're pretty good at using their good old Uncle Google, right? They use good old Uncle Google. That's almost a tongue twister. They use Google when they have procrastinated and have an essay due in a couple hours. Plagiarism, super easy with Google, right? They Google answers. They just type in the question instead of challenging their own understanding, right? They use Google to be very answer focused. But if we can kind of switch that on its head, and that's where the training and encouragement comes in, if we can flip that around so that students are using it appropriately to better help their understanding, that's fantastic. And when students are resourceful enough to find resources for all those things that they need to learn, that's great, right? So what we're getting at here is that students need to know exactly the things that they are expected to know and how they're going to demonstrate that. That might sound like a common core set of standards. I promise you that's not what I'm speaking of. If you need to be trained on how to use the document needs to go in the circle file. It has no place in education. The outcome was the exact opposite of their intent, the authors of the Common Core. They wanted something that was going to be very deep instead of broad. The old adage was our curriculum is a mile wide and an inch deep. They wanted to flip it around. They made it wider and shallower by accident, because they tried to articulate every possible nuanced thing. So concise is beautiful. Your students need to have a nice, concise list of the things they need to know, and they need to understand how it is they're going to demonstrate their knowledge. Now, I want to be really, really clear on this. When I say precise and exact, here's what I'm talking about. We mentioned this in one of the previous episodes, because a foreign language class can really help us gain insight here. If a student's taking a foreign language class, they might be expected to be able to listen to, say, a radio program in a foreign language, understand that, and then answer questions also in that foreign language. That is exactly explicit and concise. That's appropriate. What's inappropriate is giving the students the radio program ahead of time, or translating it for them ahead of time, or telling them the questions ahead of time. That is inappropriate, because then the students just have to recite what it is you told them, or they just have to mimic what you just did, depending on the class, right? But in this situation, they would just have to recite the thing that you told them. So the only thing a grade reflects in that situation is, did they pay attention? Not, did they develop this skill and this conceptual ability? Do you see what I'm talking about there? So it's really, really important when we say students need to know exactly what's expected of them, and exactly they need to understand how it is they're going to demonstrate. We're not saying tell them the questions. What I'm saying is they need to have an understanding of what is expected of them, and then they need to have some practice that will help them to develop those skills that they're going to need to demonstrate their knowledge. Okay, so one of the nice things, one of the benefits that came out of doing distance learning, teaching students remotely, because of the school closures, because of COVID-19 and all those things, was I developed a much better course expectation sheet for students. I always have one for myself. And here's how I've designed one, and this might be of use to you, so I'll make it brief. But when I'm going to teach a new class, say I'm going to teach geometry, I'm a math teacher, I would sit down and I would make a list of all the things that I believe to be most important about geometry, just off the top of my head. These are the key ideas. These are the big things. And then I would start looking through, the curriculum calendars, the Common Core standards, the textbook, published, if my school has them, published exams and things like that. And then I would maybe, add or change the focus a little bit on that list. But the thing I never did before was really share that list with the students. So because we were distance learning this year, what I did is I created an Excel spreadsheet, lots of columns in it, because it's a functioning in real time tool that students can use to stay on track. But what's important that is transferable is there's a list of what it is that we've been learning and when in one column, and another column contains resources. So that might be videos I found, it might be videos I made, it might be notes I typed up for them, it might be a website I found that's that's appropriate. It could be a website I found that has practice materials on it, things like that, and they're all aligned. So the students, in the end, when they want to study for their final, and we'll get to studying in just a minute, it's all right there. They have access to what it is that I expect them to know and how I expect them to demonstrate that knowledge, and they have resources to help them prepare. Do you see? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about students having access to everything. And then the other key point is that, say you're teaching an AP class, and you might feel, appropriately so, that the scope of that class is larger than, it's too much for the amount of time you have for your students. It doesn't matter. The students still need to have access to everything, because some students are going to take it upon themselves to take advantage of that access, and they're going to learn things on their own that they don't need you to teach them everything. We're going to get into that in just a minute. We're going to try to flip some of the ownership of learning on its head right here. So also, to be clear, I'm not saying the other extreme is valid, is appropriate either. I'm not saying you just give students everything and wash your hands of it. It's up to them. Our job is to, and this is where the training and encouragement comes in, we have to help them learn how to make use of all those resources. So number one, we want to make sure they have access to everything they need, right? They need to understand what it is they're supposed to learn and how they're supposed to demonstrate that they've learned it, and then they need to have some resources. And again, we don't have to provide them with every single resource. They're resourceful. If they want, they can figure out some things that will be useful too. And that would be, even better. So that brings me to kind of the next point. Let's get into the training and encouragement part. The other day, it was a Friday night, kind of late. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and I was watching some YouTube videos. And one of the suggested videos was a video of Peyton Manning, the NFL quarterback. And he's kind of funny and entertaining and engaging. He's got a lot of charisma. So, yeah, I'll watch that. That sounds uplifting. I was really stunned because it was actually quite a serious conversation he was having, and it actually very much pertains to what we're talking about here. He said that for him, because he knew he wasn't the most physically talented, he had to be prepared. And so he watched a lot of game film. And that's where he reviewed his own performance, but also looked at the tendencies and techniques used by his opposition. But he said one of the keys is, because all quarterbacks do that, all professional quarterbacks watch game film. He said that the key is, one of the biggest differences between a really good quarterback and a quarterback that is kind of stuck, that's reached their ceiling, is that in watching game film, the really good quarterbacks and those that are developing and continue to improve, they take notes. I was kind of shocked. He also mentioned that young quarterbacks often resist taking notes. They don't want to. They don't want to take notes because it's hard work to think. And it seemed kind of natural just to do it, but when you write it down, you really have to articulate it. And that practice of slowing down your thoughts to articulate them in a way that will be digestible in the future, it's hard work. It's not easy. And so that's one of the things he had talked about. And so that was kind of interesting because the writing things down, man, it's massively important. And you see, that gets us to studying and notes and all those kinds of things. See, studying actually begins, learning begins in the classroom. How students engage in class, how they take notes, how they prepare, what they do in response to, say, a performance that was in their mind lacking. All that's super important. And so I want to address an issue here. And I don't want to look down on the situation. And what I mean by that is, it's sometimes easy to say, oh, this is what's wrong with everything. I just want to identify it so that we can look up at where we want to go, right? One dynamic that is in place that is extremely unhealthy is that today, teachers are responsible for grades. Teachers are responsible for learning. Teachers are responsible for the outcomes. You might not think that's true, but it is. It's true, and you can see it in the way that education is conducted today. So we got to flip that on its head, and this is a really good way to start that. We've got to change our position from the person being responsible for the learning, being responsible for students' learning, to being a coach and a guide, somebody that shepherds students through the process of learning. So we're giving them the access, we're giving them all the tools, we're teaching them how to engage. And that we got to flip that on its head. And this is a great opportunity to do exactly that. So let's talk about a situation where this could begin, something concrete. Say students just took a quiz. You hand the quizzes back to the whole class. We kind of mentioned this a little bit ago with whole class goals, but let's get into that a little more. So students have their tests back. Typically what happens is the teacher says, hey, Johnny, you didn't learn or you didn't demonstrate that you know how to do blank. And then you just give them remediation. You teach them how to do blank. That's not wrong, but it's completely insufficient. And that approach in isolation, which it's mostly in isolation, that approach right there is absolutely motivated by the idea that the teacher is responsible for the outcomes, not the student. What should happen is students should be asked, hey, what did you mess up? Why did you mess it up? Did you employ poor test-taking skills? Did you hurry? Would you not read the instructions? Did you just make simple little mistakes, or was it something deeper? Were there things on that test? Were there things that you were supposed to know that test exposed your ignorance of? So let's categorize your performance? What things can you improve, in the moment? How can you become a better test taker so you don't make those little mistakes? And then those things that are big, well, we do need to learn them. But more importantly, we need to discover why it is you didn't learn them. What went wrong? How is it that, what behaviors did you have that contributed to those struggles, to that negative outcome? How can you change it? Those are the conversations that need to be held. And they don't need to be held one-on-one. I mean, they can be, and that's really good if a student approaches you and you have that kind of relationship. But that conversation needs to be held with the entire class, and those students need to be writing down their reflections along these lines on their quizzes. And then from that, they need to develop, some action plans, right? That kind of conversation initiates flipping that relationship of who's responsible for learning and what is the role of the teacher on its head from where it is now to where I believe it should go. Okay? Now, it also kind of, it does a bunch of things. Puts the student in the driver's seat. Anyway, it helps them to focus on their behaviors and their organization and all these kinds of things are going to come out. But one thing that's probably true of all of your students is they probably don't study. And if they do, they probably do it poorly. See, number one, they probably don't know how. And number two, they've probably never really had to. So they've never really been tested in a way that they had to learn to study. Like we were saying, there's a lot of pressure on teachers to produce good grades. And some of that is institutional. Schools are evaluated on grades, passing rates, graduation rates, all those things. But there's also the other side. When your students have good grades, parents are happier, kids are happier, life is easier. You get a lot of positive feedback from having good grades, but it's really, really important. It's really important to make sure that those grades are coming about because the students are developing and becoming better students. And in doing so, they have better production. Those grades should be a reflection of the student development, not just a grade. Like we were talking about with the foreign language thing. You can definitely artificially engineer some grades. Everybody's happy, everybody looks good, but it's not what education is about. So anyway, let's talk about studying, because studying begins with student engagement in class. See, studying isn't just a session that you do. Studying is happening, and it can even happen passively where something in the back of your mind is being chewed on, and it comes to the forefront of your mind, and all of a sudden you go, oh, I see something. In a way, that's studying, that's learning, that's a realization, but it also can happen more structured. And it begins in class with note-taking. You see, students, when they're taking notes, what they're really doing is they're writing a letter to themselves, their future selves, about stuff that's important. Notes should not look like a textbook. Notes, when students are taking notes, they need to leave lots of space, because as they go back and look at their notes, they're going to write down observations. They're going to record things that they've realized, things they've learned, predictions and questions, and they also need to leave room to answer those questions. So there needs to be lots of mistakes, reflections, all those kinds of things. Notes should not look like a textbook. Notes aren't how to do this. Notes are a recording of observations and realizations. That's what notes should be. It's kind of like when Peyton Manning was talking about taking notes. What he's talking about is, oh, this is what I messed up. This is what I didn't understand. Ooh, this is a new piece of information. This is important. I wonder if this is going to be happening. And then, oh, that did happen. Or it didn't happen, and here's why. Those are what notes should be a recording of. They should be a recording of the learning process, and they should also help be a reminder for what was learned. Okay, so here's one piece of advice that can kind of help students to develop this. So when students are doing homework, that homework should have something that stretches them. It should have something that's a little beyond what was done in class. And the first place students should turn to for help is their notes. Now, if they find what is there in their notes, that's great. They should probably jot something real quick and highlight it. Oh, this is what this really means. Because what happens is if you're confused and you find the help, you already had it. What happened was you didn't know the value of that piece of information, and now you do. So they need to write that down. They need to write down the value of that information because they might forget it. And when they're just reviewing their notes before a test, which is a part of studying, those little realizations will help keep everything fresh. Okay, but if they're still confused, they can't get resolution to what it is that's confusing them, they need to write a question on their homework in their notes. And what they should do is, as they're writing these questions, and they can make these questions in more times, they have more opportunity than just homework to write these questions. They can do it when they're reviewing. They can do it, all the time. When they write a question, they need to put a sticky note in it so that the sticky note's sticking out of the notebook. When they've resolved that question, either they've come to understand, they looked it up, they asked a friend, asked a teacher, whatever. When they've resolved a question, they need to answer the question in their notes, highlight it, remove the sticky note. When, and this is very a tactile thing right here, when the test is coming up, the student has prepared if they have been writing questions and all the sticky notes are gone. They're prepared. They got it. Now they're not totally done. They still need to rehearse, they need to review, keep those things fresh, but that's huge right there. That is absolutely huge. So, man, that is if you can train your students on that, you can encourage them to do it, it's going to be super powerful. Now, next piece of advice was something that actually my youngest daughter learned. I wished I knew this when I was a student. When she was a freshman in high school, she was taking this biology class, and it was a college preparatory class. So it stretches kids. It's got a lot of problem solving and anyway, it's a tough class for freshmen. And she didn't feel prepared for the end of course examination, and she wanted to do well. So what she ended up doing is she ended up making a study guide. And the study guide is kind of like the course expectation list. These are all the things that we've learned. These are all the things that I have to know. So she made a nice little list right there. And then what she did is she categorized herself in 1 of 3 levels with each of those things. Like, I don't remember exactly her number scale, but let's say number 1 is, I don't remember this. Number 2 is, I kind of got that. Number 3 is, I'm rock solid, right? So made the list and then went through and categorized. I think she might have done it with highlighters. So, whatever. But number 1 is, I don't remember this. I don't know this very well at all. Number 2 is, I kind of get it, but I find it difficult. Number 3 is, I'm solid. Got this. And so then what ends up happening is the next step is you take all of those iffy items and you got some work to do. You've got some research to do. You've got to crack the textbook. You got to find it in your notes. You got to read about it. You got to maybe watch some YouTube videos, collaborate with friends. And then if you need to, you go ask your teacher, hey, I've got some questions about this. Now keep in mind, I don't get it, and can you teach me everything? Isn't going to work. There's just not enough time. Also, the teacher already taught it to you. Why is them teaching it to you again going to help? It's not. The student has to have some quality questions in their back pocket. They need to do some of that really hard work on their own to make that information accessible. Because then when they go to the teacher and say, hey, I really had trouble with this, and now this is what I understand, but I'm stuck here, man, they're going to know the value of that information they're about to receive. They can go back and record that in all their notes and things like that, right? So once they've worked through all those issues in number 1 and tried some practice for number 2, what they do is, what you should do in maybe it's the third step, is you go through and you make a practice test. That practice test is problems that come maybe from the textbook, definitely come from homework assignments, classroom examples that are in your notes, and old tests and quizzes. And then the student needs to take that practice test under test conditions. You see, tests make us feel uncomfortable and inadequate. Being able to take a test, deal with all that anxiety, is a learned skill. It's something you can practice. And so the better the student can create that test environment when they're practicing, the better off they're going to be. So no notes, no cheating, no artificial breaks they couldn't take during class, no distractions, doing your very, very best, not skipping stuff, not looking up the answers ahead of time, taking it like a test and then evaluating. And then you go back and you kind of loop back to your study guide, and you kind of reevaluate where you are and all those things. And through that process, you're going to be well prepared. So she developed that skill, and it really, really paid off for her in, well, massive ways for quite a while. So she developed into quite a gifted student, and a lot of it had to do with that. The work ethic, too. I mean, you can't. Anyway, parents shouldn't brag. I'm a parent, a proud parent of both my kids. I don't want to brag too much, excessively, especially not here. It's got to be meaningful. So I hope that is something I have taught my students how to do, and it really has turned things around for lots and lots of students. Okay. Uh, Now I want to talk about using another resource, having students be resourceful by using their old assessments. So it's really common that it's a common practice in a classroom that students do quiz corrections and turn them in either as an extra homework assignment or receive partial credit. And I kind of believe that's off the mark too. I believe that's securing good grades in a way. I mean, it could help with student development, but that's not the focus. And so it probably doesn't. Overall, it probably doesn't really help kids to get better. So before diving into those quiz corrections, the students need to, as we discussed a little bit earlier, identify what it is they messed up with and what it is that they can do to improve. And they need to annotate these things on their test. So they need to have kind of a summary at the top that they make when they're done, but they need to go through this test and dig deeper into each question to not just write the correction, but also write what it is they messed up. And then if they really get stuck on something, that's where that sticky note process can come into play. And so that is so powerful because it really gets the students to reflect on their performance. Let me share with you two more examples. They're rather short, but it's a way that it's some examples of how you can train students on how to be better students and how to learn independently, how to be self-governed, and encourage them to do so. And so when you kind of set it up and they realize the power of it, they're going to start doing it on their own. And that's really the benefit, right? You're not going to be there to hold their hands forever. You want them to be well prepared when they leave. At least I believe you would. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening. Anyway, so recently I had this freshman girl. She struggled on a test, and she came and asked me for help. She knew what the topic was that gave her trouble, and she wanted me to sit down and teach her the whole thing. Now, she's a very polite kid, so it was no, she went about it right. It wasn't off-putting in any way, shape, or form. But what I did is in short, without getting into the details, it might look bad. I just gave her a video, asked her to watch it, and then report back to me. But the conversation was really important because it's all too often that students are going to, they're going to follow the letter of the law. They're going to do what their teacher says, and they think they're just going to be rewarded with the positive outcomes because they were compliant. But the reality is, especially when you're talking about developing a young person's mind, it's the spirit of the law that's important. It's, are they engaging for the right reasons more than are they engaging exactly as you told them to? Do you see what I'm talking about? So anyway, here's what happened. I told her to watch this video because I believe she had, say, around 85% proficiency with this topic. It's one or two little things that were kind of, jumping up and causing her confusion. And that confusion was kind of spiraling out of control. There was some cognitive distortion and some catastrophizing done on her part. But, we talked about that. But what we really talked about is that I want her to watch this video because this video is appropriate for what it is she needs to know at the level she needs to know it. And what I explained is that she needs to be very careful not to lose focus when she thinks that she understands what's being shared in the video. This is kind of like a scavenger hunt, but you don't know what it is you're looking for and you don't know where it is, but you know you found it when you go, oh. And so I asked her to record those things, those oh moments, and then report back to me what it is that she went, oh, about. So she did, and it went really well. She had it. She got it. It was just one or two little things. And I could have figured those things out. I may have known already. I can't remember the specifics of that test anymore. But even if I didn't know already, I could have figured it out pretty easily and addressed those things for her. But that's me being responsible for her learning instead of helping her to learn how to learn. You see? Now, another similar situation happened. This was another female student, a sophomore. She was having trouble. She felt overwhelmed. She felt totally lost in this one review lesson. We're getting ready to take a midterm. And so we're reviewing some things that we had learned before. At the end of class, she comes and sees me and says, totally lost. Totally don't get it. So the short of the conversation is, I said, hey, read these pages in the book and let me know how it went. That's the short of it. But the conversation that really happened was that I knew she knew those things from before, but it's been a while. And she had forgotten. They were stagnant. They were stale. They weren't fresh in her mind. And so what I asked her to do is, as she's reading through that chapter, it was only a section, 3 pages or something. As she's reading through that material, everything that she came across and says, oh, I remember that. I wanted her to note it, to write it down, to take note of it. And then I wanted her to report back to me what it is that she realized she already knew. Then on the flip side of that, as she's going through it, if there's something in there that's like confusing or seems completely unfamiliar, well, focus on that. Really get into that. Try to find some problems. Look through your notes. See if you can reconstruct that understanding that you probably had before. And if not, you might come up with you might develop the understanding you need. And I want to hear about that too. So in all of these things, what we're talking about with the training and the encouragement, we're training the students how to engage with remediation. We're trying to train them on how to engage when they're learning. So we want to give them everything. We want to give them access to everything they need to know, and then we're training them how to use the resources that will help them to learn those things and to demonstrate it in the appropriate way. But we're doing it in a way that we're focusing on the student learning how to do those things, learning how to learn, learning to be resourceful to make use of all those things. So that's why we called it access, training, and encouragement. We're training them how to be better students. We're encouraging them to take that risk, because it is a risk to try something new, especially if you've got the kind of student that's been an A student because they've been compliant. And now in your class, you actually have a rigorous academic expectation, and you're not teaching the student how to just get the right answers. You're expecting them to develop as students so they can develop the ability to get the right answers on their own, kind of like with the language thing. Man, that can be a tough thing for them. It can really rock their foundation. So by encouraging them to try something new and then setting it up for them, they're going to start to realize and connect those dots. They're going to start to realize that, hey, by doing this, this is the outcome. And, ooh, man, I'm really good when I try things this way, and I need to really make sure I'm doing that. I need to be reflective about this. I need to take notes this way. Or I really need to avoid this situation and instead try things like this. By helping those students understand how they can become the best student that they can be, all the results are going to be there. So give them access. Train them how to use the resources and encourage them to do so. Make sure you're reviewing with them the specifics of why it is you're trying to get them to try these certain things this way. And then, debrief. Get back with them and talk with them about how did things go? What went well? What went wrong? All those kinds of things. So anyway, got a couple questions for you, right? I want to hear your feedback. So first thing I want to know is, do your students have access to everything that they're expected to know, and do they understand how they're supposed to demonstrate it, right? Now, that doesn't mean, well, we already talked about that. Just like we said with the example about learning a foreign language, right? Do they have all of the nuts and bolts available to them in the dry material, right? That's not a question that you have to answer to me, but maybe that's a way to start a conversation. That's more of a guide for yourself. Okay, second thing I want to know is, did any of this advice that I shared strike you, make you pause and imagine how you could use that in your own classroom? I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear back from you on that point. Second, flip side of that is, what ideas do you have to share that other teacher can use, that I could use? What is it that you found that really helps students become better students? And then one last thing. If any of this has been thought-provoking, please share it with others. If this has been something that might be impactful or have meaning to another teacher or somebody that's even outside of education, please share it. You see, we're trying to start this change in education from the inside. And one of the biggest hurdles is teachers don't have the influence and the reach. We don't have the influence and the reach that a politician or a high-level administrator has. They have all of that reach, but one of the things that kind of comes along with their job, even if they're doing it perfectly, is they want to compress everything and get rid of all that nuance. They want everything to be interchangeable and the same. They have an ideal teacher in mind and everybody needs to fit that. They have an ideal program in mind and everything needs to fit that. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we're facing in education. We do need to have standards. They need to be clear. But how those standards are served and how students are served, that needs some change. So with that said, please share. Super big deal to me. I want to hear from you. Hope you guys are well and talk to you soon.